Aloha, and thank you for joining me in video number, I believe it's 7 in cognitive, and we are working on cognitive distortion number 5. So this is video number 7 because, the first two videos were like introductions. Anyway, cognitive distortion number 5 is jumping to conclusions. Before we get into this distortion, I just want to remind you that I'm not a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist or counselor, but I have worked in the field of education for over 20 years, and I've worked with students and youth and young adults ages 4 to 22, and and also not just in special education, because I talk about that a lot, but also in the general education population. I've taught that population. Um, and so it's just, I've worked with a number of different populations, but I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that I've worked with very just different populations. But there are some things that are just universal, whether, I mean, it doesn't matter if you have a disability, or you're a diagnosed disability, or you don't, or your age, or where you come from. All of us have these things we call cognitive distortions. Now, some of us may have more than others. Some of us may engage in just a few. Some of us may engage in all of them. But it's universal that we have them. And so it is my hope to help raise awareness about these distortions. Why is that? Because when we are aware of the cognitive distortions that we have, we can change them quicker. And so when we're struggling or in the middle of strife, or feeling pain, or ready to, to have these distorted thoughts, we can stop in our tracks and fix them before they cause too much damage. And so that's why it's important for us to look at these cognitive distortions. And I think that, especially jumping to conclusions, I think that that's something, honestly, that's very universal. And so, that's why we're here. Anyway, let's dig into jumping to conclusions. The definition here, number 1, let's read that together. So you make a negative interpretation, okay, even though there are no definite facts that convincingly support your conclusion. You do either of the following, okay? A, mind reading, or B, the fortune teller error. So let's go with A, mind reading first. So you arbitrarily conclude that someone is reacting negatively to you, and you don't bother to check it out before you jump to that conclusion. It just becomes automatic. It's like your default. And then the fortune teller error is where you anticipate things will turn out badly, and you just feel convinced that your prediction is already an established fact, even when you have no evidence or nothing to substantiate that. And so I bet that you can already see how this can cause, just problems in your life, right? Where you're just automatically thinking, just jumping to the conclusion, and most times it's a negative conclusion. So let's read the distortion scenario. Okay, so an acquaintance walks past you and gives you what you perceive is a fiery, quote, stink eye. You immediately snub the person and may tell yourself that the person has a problem with you. Okay. Now, I'm sure you've been in a situation similar to this, and you can relate, right? Let's think about it for a couple seconds. When have you been in a similar situation? Okay. When I read this distortion scenario just now, it made my mind started thinking about all of the different ways that I can relate to, this whole idea of jumping to conclusions, the fortune teller error and the mind reading, right? Like, let's just say, well, what came to my mind was when I was applying for jobs and I was interviewing, right? After a few of them, when I'd get a call, it'd be like, I already know I'm not getting the job. It's like you're gonna jump to that negative conclusion. And all I did was get a phone call, right? The phone just rang, and I'm automatically thinking like, oh my gosh, like I know I'm not gonna get the job. It's I thought about that. I thought about, okay, not passing a test, right? You take one of those tests, like as a teacher, right? You take praxis exams, and then every time or you do professional development, so you have to turn in portfolios every year, right, for various classes. And every time, just before you're about to get the grade, or just before you're about to get the results, when press the submit button, you're like, oh my gosh, why did I do this? I know I'm gonna flunk. I know I'm gonna fail, right? That's another thing that came to my mind as I was reading this jumping to conclusions. Or you know I see something, or let's just say my husband's, his patterns start changing, and maybe he's holding his phone, right? And I'm like, my mind immediately starts going to like, hey, what are you doing that's wrong? Like, are you doing something negative? Or are you gonna do something to hurt me? Right? It's like, it's that jumping to conclusion when you really have no evidence, or maybe you have one thing that makes you feel this way, and automatically it's just, that's it, that's the answer. Or even like you misplaced something and then you think somebody took it, right? It's that default where you're just automatically going to jump to a conclusion without having any evidence. Again, I am sure that you can relate to anything, or to at least one thing that I said, right? Now, this particular distortion scenario, I know, right, that you guys have been through this, where someone's looking at you and you're like, what are you looking at? Like you're automatically jumping to conclusions like it's negative. I remember once, I can't remember what store I was in. I don't know, maybe it was like, I don't remember what store I was in, but someone this lady kept staring at me, and I was getting annoyed, and I was like, but then, what I'm thinking, I'm telling you this and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I do the same thing too. Like, I will stare at someone thinking like, oh my gosh, she's such a nice looking woman. I hope she knows, right, that she's like a beautiful person, right? And then you stare, and then they're looking at you and they're like, oh my gosh, and then you realize, anyway. So I was in a store, and this person kept staring at me, and then um I could feel my blood boiling. I was getting irritated, and then she came up to me. She's like, "You have such pretty eyes," and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" I felt so bad. I felt like sick to my stomach, because here I was under my breath, kind of cursing her out, and she was looking at my eyes. Now I don't think I have like pretty eyes, but anyway, that's what she said, and I was like, "Okay." I gotta stop doing this whole jumping to conclusions and thinking negative. Anyway, okay, so you get the idea, right? So that's the distortion scenario. An acquaintance passes you, gives you a fiery stink eye, right? You immediately snub the person, and then you just, because you think that person has a problem with you. Okay, so what's the impact on thinking? You form negative patterns of thinking. This becomes your default. You start to believe that the world is out to get you, or the world is 100% like just always judging you. There's not much positive that can come of this, right? What's the impact on the self? Well, very similar to our previous distortions. Right? You start to develop these patterns, and it becomes very, very difficult to welcome the goodness in others, and you just become like overly skeptical. Okay, how do we fix this? Well, here we are. I'm reading right here. Tell yourself that the person's issue is the person's issue, right? So let's just say this person is, we're in this distortion scenario, and this person does snub you, and that is what that person meant, right? Even though that's the case, right? You don't have to jump to conclusions. You don't have to react or respond. You can simply tell yourself that the person's issue is the person's issue. Now, I've had to do this myself thousands of times. I'd probably be a very rich person right now if I got a buck for every time I had to, to coach myself through this after having this kind of experience, right? You've got to remind yourself that any negative reaction on your part, right, could yield negative consequences. So you're engaging in positive self-talk, right? You're saying, okay, okay, mommy, stop. Whatever this person is is has going on, right? It belongs to them. It doesn't belong to you. Okay, so even if it is negative, who cares? It's not yours. It's not, you are not the owner of it. You have to remind yourself that any negative reaction on your part could yield a negative consequence. So that story I was telling you about in the store and the woman staring at me, I could have told myself before I started, like shit talking her right under my breath, I could have told myself, whatever she's staring at, it could be positive, right? Or it belongs to her. I could have stopped before I started shit talking, and then I wouldn't have felt bad when she actually came up to me and gave me a compliment, right? So I'm realizing that I don't want the consequence, that consequence to happen to me again, where I got to eat crow, right? Because I was shit talking. So what do you do? What do you do to not get that consequence? Well, you learn from it, and then you employ the strategy before you start engaging in that negative behavior. Okay. And then a big part, what you really need to do, right, is just brainstorm, right, what those negative consequences could be. If Because like in that situation, right, I am aware of it. I remember what happened. But sometimes you're going to find yourself in situations where you are thinking negative, and you're going to have to brainstorm what those consequences could be if you jump to conclusions, right? And then you're going to have to choose another path and then expect the best outcome for that path. So let me give you an example. Let's just say, in the example of, oh my gosh, you think your spouse is fooling around because now he or she is holding his or her phone, or now they have a password, or now they're coming home from work like late all the time. Okay, so you start jumping to conclusions, and you're like, oh my gosh, what is this person doing? You start feeling really negative. Before, right, you start really allowing yourself to go down that path, you're gonna say, okay, wait, I gotta stop. I can't go down this path, because it's gonna drive me crazy. I'm gonna start engaging in negative behaviors. I'm gonna start getting angry and frustrated. I'm going to ruin relationships. I'm going to be a nag, because I'm going to be like crying to my friends over and over and over and over again, right? You've got to brainstorm what those negative consequences are going to be, and then you have to turn it around, and you have to choose another path, and then expect the best outcome for that path. So like, here's the path. Here's the other, and you can't see me, but I'm quoting other path. That is to confront that person, and you're going to expect the best outcome for that path. So let's just say I'm thinking that is a situation, right, with the spouse, or with the person staring, or whether you did pass a test, right? And so let's just say it's the test now, right? You're going to say, okay, no, I'm not going to be negative, because I don't want to give off that negative energy. I don't want the consequences of being negative. I'm going to just believe that that I passed the test. Okay? And then I'm going to expect that I passed the test. Now, if you don't pass the test, then you use other strategies. You're going to tell yourself that it's okay, it wasn't meant to be. Maybe I need to study more. I might call, if I can, or get my test results, and then study the areas of weakness, right? Or if it's the whole scenario about the spouse, let's just say you confront your spouse, and you say something like, hey, I've noticed this, and this. I'm a little bit worried, or I feel a little bit afraid because I don't know what this is. And then you're going to expect the best. that your spouse is faithful to you, that there were reasons behind the behavior. And then, right, you're expecting the best. Let's just say it is negative and that your spouse is doing something negative. Then you just expect that whatever is in your path now, you're going to use it to extract whatever lesson that you need to extract. And then you're going to learn from it, move on, grow from it, make some changes, etc., etc. Okay, so jumping to conclusions, right? Very can be very negative, can cause very negative consequences. We don't want that, so we need to be aware of it. Okay, now we're going to apply what we just did, and you are going to do number 6, right? The activity. Here's the activity, and you can read it along with me. You're going to describe a time when you interpreted someone else's behavior as either antagonistic or having malice, then found out you were wrong. Okay, let me read that again. So you're going to describe here a time when you interpreted, so when you jump to conclusions, right, that someone else's behavior was either antagonistic or was filled with malice, but then you found out you were wrong. So you're going to write that. You're going to write that here. Okay. Now you've done that. Okay, you've written it. All right, now you're going to ask yourself, do you need to improve your thinking patterns in this area? And then you're going to tell yourself why or why not. Okay, when you're thinking the why and the why nots, right, you want to think about the different impacts to the cognitive distortions that we went over, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you're going to explain that in this section. Now, explaining it, okay, is, just from like, teaching and learning perspective, helps you to solidify that lesson in your brain. So you want to take the time to go ahead and actually describe the time, explain how you were wrong, explain why you need to improve your thinking patterns in this area, okay? And then if just say that you're awesome, right, in this area, explain how you were able to be awesome in this area. And then, take that information and go share it with someone else when you see that they're engaging in this kind of behavior, right? Jumping to conclusions. Okay. So I want to thank you for sticking with me thus far in the Challenge Your Thoughts workbook. We are going to discuss, we're going to do the same thing, right, for the next 5 cognitive distortions. And the next cognitive distortion is catastrophizing. Okay, that's a big one. And I do this one too, where we magnify or we minimize. So you can catastrophize in one end of the spectrum, which is magnification, or at the other end of the spectrum, which is minimizing. And we're going to talk about that one next. All right, thank you again so much. I appreciate that you are here with me watching this video, even though right now I'm talking to myself. And I hope you come back. Thank you and aloha.